I'm Lawrence Francis, host of Interpreting Wine, welcoming you to the Leiterberg Special Series. Across these 3 episodes, recorded in February 2023, we'll be exploring the modern Leiterberg scene in the company of 3 respected producers, giving you the most up-to-date exploration of the region available anywhere in podcast format. So make sure you're subscribed to the Interpreting Wine podcast to be alerted when new episodes go live. We continue the Leiterberg series today in the company of Georg Preiler of Weingut Preiler. We hear Georg's origin story, and he talks taking over the winery from his parents. Before discussing responses to the wines from the markets, he gives us a Leiterberg virtual tour, talks geological influences, discusses the range of wines they sell, before getting into viticulture and the relationship he has with each vineyard, before closing on the Austrian Tasting London 2023. Enjoy.
My name is Georg Preiler from the winery Preiler. I had the pleasure to take over this well-established winery many years ago from my parents. In general, we are this typical traditional winery located in the very eastern part of Austria, close to the Hungarian border. Mm-hmm. So let me say in the way of the North Alpine side. So when we start with Burgundy, Champagne, Switzerland, Germany, Austria, we might be one of the warmest part. That's why there's no Riesling and Grüner Veltliner here. It's more about the red wines, Blaufränkisch, and fine Burgundian wines. Mm-hmm. That means in a logical consequence that it is very important for me and for myself to write down the vineyard where it comes from. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So I see myself not as a cellar master. I see him more like a hand worker.
Yeah. Okay. And your name is on the bottle, so yeah, maybe tell us a little bit about the family and the winery itself and how you came to be working there.
Yeah, I grew up actually directly in the winery, like my 3 sons does nowadays. Mm-hmm. That means that we live in the winery. Every day is like a very exciting day. When you wake up in the morning in the winery, you know exactly what you have to do. And that's something that makes me always smile in the morning. And we work with 24 hectares of organic grapes, all up on the hills. Mm-hmm. 80% of the 24 hectares are planted with Blaufränkisch and Pinot Blanc. These are the 2 varieties which shows in our village and the neighbor village. That means Schützen am Gebirge and Ockau, best where it comes from. And we work in the cellar mostly by not pushing the wines, more by standing beside and having a look. I always compare that with children, you know. When you have children, you always want that they fall down to learn it, but not too hard. And the same for the wines. And some children needs help and some needs no help at all. And the same is for the wines and the vintages. That's something most exciting for me. So we work mostly with big wooden casks and some amphoras, just to let the wines age for a minimum of, the youngest wine comes after 8 months, and the longest time that they are staying in the cask or in the bottle is like 4 years. But there's not really a receipt for that. It's more like a spontaneous decision. That's why it's always not only the ground that makes the wine, it's also the winemaker with the vineyard together.
Okay, very cool. And could we go a bit into the family story? You know, because I've actually spoken before to winemakers in Austria, and I always find it a very interesting time, really, when you have the next generation coming in, often with new ideas and different plans and different thoughts and different experiences. So maybe take us back to what I believe was 2012 when you kind of took over when there was that transition.
And the lucky thing was that the winery is older than 5 generations that we worked with the vineyards out there. And the good thing is that my parents as well, my grandfathers, were always in time, and they always decided to do what they like to drink. And I grew up in such a winery with open minds and open ideas. It's always a big part to take over a winery. It's like a process. So it's not from the first to the next day. It's a process that you take over step by step. Very often, I always see also at my colleagues' places that the young generation starts, first of all, with the cellar and, of course, with the customers. Because the customers means that they love to travel. They want to see the whole world. And my father started already to export. Yeah, one of the first customers was actually in London in the beginning of the 90s. So he already grew up with an open mind and open ideas. And that me grew up in the world of fine wines from the beginning of the 80s, 90s on. So what's the difference of the wines? How can you feel it, where it comes from? Can you taste it? Have the structure. And this was like a process. And my father or my parents still helps me in the winery, of course, if I need them. But to be in retirement always means that you can do what you like. You don't have to do it. And you don't have to be the first one in the winery in the morning.
Yeah.
It's part of retirement. That does not mean that you stop working. You just do what you like.
It sounds like they've earned it as well, so that's good for them. I mean, I think that would actually be really interesting to get a sense. I mean, I know, we're talking about, what is it now? More than 30 years. It sounds as though you've been exporting, but I don't know if there are particular kind of events maybe, or turning points. Since 92, which is when I believe you started exporting, and the current day, in terms of, maybe what do you do? What sort of differences do you notice, either in terms of what the market is kind of asking for, and the feedback, I guess, that you're getting from the market, but then equally what the vineyards are giving you, and what the style of the wines has kind of now become.
I always compare a vineyard like a piano. So if you give me the best piano in the world and you place it in front of me and say, play, that does not mean that I can play. It's the best piano. It's just a point of interesting to the piano, a point of training. And if you have a bit of talent, it's not a disadvantage. And it's always, that means that the winemaker itself and the vineyard has to be in harmony. So if I like to have rich wines, for example, and I have a vineyard with fine wines, we will never come together. And when I took over the winery, I did some vineyards away and got some new vineyards that I appreciated more to have from the fruit balance. And I think that's a very important part that I was trained when I grew up, is always to make what you like to drink. And then it's not bad to find somebody who wants to buy it, of course, because we live from there. But in general, it's always the thing that you like. And if I'm not only drinking my wines, I'm a wine freak. I buy a lot of wines all over the world. So automatically, you're always up to date. I remember when my father grew up, he did the absolutely right thing to make wines that showed that they are as great as the great ones in the world. That was the 80s, the 90s. That means for him, the fantastic red wines was wines from Italy, for example, Sassicaia, Ornellaia, just this new started project of Vino di Tavola, stuff like that. Nowadays, for myself, thanks to my parents that they did and showed that Burgenland would be able to produce its good wines, I don't need these varieties anymore. I can be very focused for the red wines on Blaufränkisch, because this is a fantastic, cool climate red wine variety, which gets constantly ripe and always gives positive acidic tannin texture, like you find it in the great cool climate red wines in the world. I remember when I really started to travel. I did a vintage in Argentina. I did a vintage in New Zealand, one in the US. So I was like a young winemaker traveling, and thankfully to my sister, who gave me in the right moment the ticket to come back home, because otherwise I think of it still traveling. I love the 2 harvested per years.
Yeah.
But I remember there was a thing I remember when was in Argentina, I wanted to see one time a big winery because I grew up in a small winery. And I took one bottle of wine with me because anyway, the baggage was so heavy. And it was like an eye-opener moment for me. And I took a Blaufränkisch from the single vineyard Goldberg vintage 2003. As you know, 2003 was a very hot vintage and it was a rich wine for me. And after 2 months at the vintage fair, they made this traditional barbecue where the winemakers came together and every winemaker brought a bottle with them. And the wines got heavier, the bottles got heavier, the winemakers got broader about it. And then I waited really at the end and I thought, now I show them intensity and richness. And I opened up this Blaufränkisch from the vintage 2003 and it was so fine and so elegant that it was for me the eye-opener that I really saw that we can never win with richness. We can never let our customers know that our best wines are the richest one, but we can make one of the finest. And of the fruit balance. This constantly ripe fruit characters is something that is very asked today. I think when I started my first traveling in sales, it was like 2002 to 2006. And this time, there was not really any request or understanding for Austrian red wines, which is a logical consequence because at this time, everybody asked for tannic wines, which has more tannics like dark chocolate, and open-minded wines, and the origin of Blaufränkisch is being reductive, and more tannins like black tea, like you find it in North Van Ron, in Burgundy, sometimes in Piedmont. So more that way. So that was not the request, but many years later, suddenly the people not only wanted to taste wines, they wanted to enjoy wines. And if the enjoy wines means also wines which has a fantastic fruit and a drinkability, and Blaufränkisch can offer that, then suddenly all my importers asked me kindly, can we have a bit more of Blaufränkisch? And that was very surprising because one Blaufränkisch was not that asked. We started actually more exporting with our white wines at the beginning. But now it's switched or goes side by side. As Burgundy rises the prices so nicely, Austrian white wines get more and more fascinating.
Yeah, people get priced out of the market, and the ones who are not collecting, the ones who are, and maybe there's a cross there, where maybe those wines have also, the prices are because of investment. Maybe it's people are buying the more expensive ones or the rarer, as you say, French or Burgundian varieties as investment vehicles, but they're actually drinking more of the Austrian ones.
Yeah. The problem in my winery, I always try to invest, but the bottles were always empty. My investment never worked out.
I love it. And let's I guess peel away another layer because we've got I think your sense of the family, who is sort of around you and who is working there at the winery, and then also a kind of an insight into the culture and some of the feedback from the market. But I want to hear about your vineyard sites in your own words, Georg. What would I see, or what would any of the listeners see if we were to kind of go over there, visit you, and you were to take us around, tour, give us that kind of virtual tour as though we were there standing alongside you.
Even if I say we're living on the foothill of the Alps, it's the truth from the geological part, but not from the highness. So the highest part in our region is a bit more than 500 meters. All the vineyards are around 200 meters. But the vineyards are between these mountains on small hills and between the lake. As you know, the lake is, I always make the joke, it's the ocean of the non-swimmers because it's only in normal year 1.5 meter deep. So not really. But it's very temperature regulation. It hasn't had this impact for our wines, more for the temperature, but the hills are very important because the foothill of the Alps means that the heart of the soil is schist, mica schist that you normally find at altitudes of 700,000 meters, 1,300 or higher. And we have that here around 200 meters. So in the world of wine, every wine's on schist. For example, when you go to Bierzo, Priorat, or Northern Rhone, are sometimes quite often rich in that kind and quite tannic. And that's the nicest thing in our region. So if you have schist, it's very charming. It's a charming minerality, even if it's young. And the next thing that I really appreciate in our region that I actually saw just when I came back home from my travels was that when you just walk over the hill, and for example, I take two of my famous vineyards, Goldberg and Steinweingarten. The Goldberg has the schist, and then you walk over. That's like a 1 minute walk, and you go up there, and you're coming immediately to limestone, fossil limestone. It's a bit like Chablis or Champagne in that way, but combined with the warm Pannonian climate. So it's just about 1 minute walk, and you're jumping from Côte-Rôtie to Chablis. Surrounded by nature protecting area. That's for me, that's why I think I love so much to work in our vineyards, because every vineyard is a total own character.
Yeah, super interesting. And I'm going to ask the clarifying question there, and why exactly is it then that wine ultimately that's grown on schist? Why does it keep its charm in your setting there, Georg?
The schist, I think, because of the altitude, because when we don't have that cool nights that we want to have more. So Burgenland in general has warm or hot days and warm to cool nights, not really cool. That means, of course, for the physiological ripeness, it's an advantage. So nowadays, I think anyway, Burgenland has a fantastic open door nowadays. When I remember wines from my grandfathers, I tasted one time the 60s from my grandfather's Blaufränkisch. And if it was a cool vintage in the 60s, this wine will age for another 300 years because this has acidity like you won't drink it. But on the other side, when you had a warm vintage, then because Blaufränkisch keeps its acidity, that's the secret. Even if it's warm, it's keeping the acidity very nicely. And if it's a warm vintage, it was a fantastic wines. And in case of global warming that I see now, there's no discussion about getting sugar degradation or something. That's easily for us to get nowadays. And harvest is in September. September is the best month to harvest because everything is dry. It's not too cool. It's not too hot. It's the nicest weather. It's not wet. Very healthy grapes. So I think at the moment Burgenland is in a perfect shape to show its best and where it comes from.
Very cool. And let's because I'm as are a lot of the listeners, we're into our geology. You know, we like rocks, and we just love to know what is underpinning. So maybe could you expand on that? You know, I think it was really interesting to hear about the different layers of soil that you have there. You know, the different types of vineyard that you have there, and maybe give us a sense of the longer term, larger geological influences that have helped shape that landscape.
Now we have about 17 different vineyard sites. We write down on the label 5 or 6. It's very outstanding from the vineyard side, and where the wines are old enough. The wines are a little bit very important to show where it comes from. Is to taste the vineyard. Is that the wines has a certain age. It's hard to say what exactly the years it needs. I always compared it with people. When I remember when I was like 15, I like to present myself more than where I come from. That's same for the wines. If you plant Blaufränkisch, young wines, it tastes fantastic Blaufränkisch, but not really where it comes from. When it comes to a certain age, it has the combination of itself, of the gentleness of itself, and of course where it comes from. And when the wines are old enough and experienced enough, they show actually exactly where they come from more in front, but they need time. Like experienced people need time. They have a long story to tell. And when I taste wines in general from us, from schist or from limestone, I always see a magic difference in limestone, which is a very citric taste, a little bit salty influence that you can also find in our red wines, like a fantastic single vineyard. This famous one is Marienthal in our neighborhood village, Ocker. Marienthal has this actually a little bit of a white wine character in a red wine. And that's something very unique. So you have a little bit of a citric acidity followed by black tea tannins and a little bit of lake influence with herbals and earthy characters, a very complex wine. And when you jump over and you go to schist, for example, like Goldberg, where when you go to Goldberg, there you have always cool winds and very hot rocks. That means cool winds, always very cool grapes. That means you keep the fruit very nicely. But the schist makes this, it's the most charming soil that I know. That means it always brings this little bit of linstone character, slightly herbal, more fruit-driven, like raspberry. The schist is the gentleman under the terroirs.
Got you. And I mean, could you say something about then? Often the bigger geological forces that kind of, I think, will help us to understand, what you're actually standing on there, and what the wines are actually showing.
So, in a larger view, as I said before, we are on the foothill of the Alps. That means we are exactly on the border between the Hungarian Wilderness, the Pannonian region, and the Central Alps. That means we get the soils from the Central Alps, so schist in the heart, and over the schist you have always layer of limestone that comes from million of years ago, where there was the big ocean, and when the big ocean went back, that's like a coral reef. So, example, the front of the hill where we have most of our vineyard sites called Schützener Stein in our village, the front side is schist. That must be the side where the waves hit. On the back side, you have just coral reef. So totally white soil, limestone. And this is combined with warm Pannonian climate. So that means that, for example, if somebody says, okay, this vineyard facing to the north, it doesn't get sun. That's not the true in our region, because for that we are not high enough. It can also happen that this is one of the warmest parts, because it starts to get the sun from lunchtime to the evening. So they're only the hot sun, not the early sun. So you have to take care actually with the cover canopy management to put the leaves away on the right side. That's not so easy actually. So even if it's facing to the north or to the west, it can be warmer than sometimes facing to the east or south. It always depends where the vineyard, in which way it is planted.
Yeah, and as you say, that sea and the fact that you don't have the extreme altitude there, those are things that are playing out there, through the regional influence. And how has that changed over time then, Georg? Because my understanding is that you have a massive diversity of wines that you're able to produce there, but that maybe 30 years ago, 40 years ago, you were perhaps labeled for particular wine styles. I believe sweet wines was one that was sort of quite famously, and certainly red wines as well. So yeah, I'm just curious. How has what you do there changed in relation to, I guess, the extended offer that you're now able to make to the market?
Yeah, my father started in the wine business in the 70s, and the people asked for wines like the old-fashioned Alsace. It means rich wines, very often with a little bit of botrytis in it. But I have to say that my grandfather already sold everything in bottle, so he was always directly on the customer. He didn't sell any cask wine or something like that. So in that case, my father got quite quickly the idea that dryness is more worthiness than sweet things, because sweet things are able to produce too easy. It's not not only on the request part, it's also on a part of how easily it's produced. We always try to find the challenge. What's the most complex things? Otherwise, you wouldn't do one variety, and one single vineyard is the most complex part for a winemaker. Because there you have to start with pruning. You can only make one decision, no blendings in the cellar. So this is something, but if you get it, it shows more harmony and when it's young than every blend that you can get. So the wine stylistics change side by side, of course, even my taste. I remember the wines that I had 20 years ago when I started in the wine business are not the same that I drink nowadays. They changed a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And are you able to give any examples? I mean, I think you've already started a little bit, but yeah, so, some examples around viticulture, maybe that I think that would be an interesting example to talk about. Maybe, viticulture in a single vineyard where you, as you say, you don't have the backstop of the blending decisions to kind of draw on later on in the process.
Yeah. I mean, it's an open secret that climate is changing. Everybody feels it every year, how extremely it is. It's getting drier in our region, which is more comfortable for working organic, but worst, of course, if you get no water at all. So you have to change a little bit the idea of vineyard working. That means when you did, for example, 20 years ago, to put all the leaves away, to get more sun. Nowadays, you do exactly the leaves, the perfection of every vineyard. That means it depends where it's facing. Some you can put the leaves away from outside, and for some just from inside. The covers are very important. Which kind of covers you use in the roses of the vineyards? Is it high? Does it take energy, or does it just bring it more energy back as you actually use? How you work with the soil. What you give the soil, how much is needed? Is the whole vineyard needed? Is it just a part? And then everything starts with pruning. Pruning is one of the most important thing from that. How you say, how much the wines have to carry. You see on the wines, okay, last year was a hard year. It was very dry. You have a very thin oak, for example, on the vines. So it means that you have that it has to carry very less grapes this year, lesser than you normally did. I mean, I have to say, we have about 5,500 wines per hectare. That means, for example, half like Burgundy or Bordeaux in that case. Otherwise, they couldn't carry it because for that we have to less rain. And so we have more normally around 1 kilogram per wine. So we need about 2 square meters to produce 1 bottle of wine.
It sounds though as, to give that level of detail and that level of care, then you've got a kind of a relationship really with each plot and each vine, and I'm just curious, at 24 hectares, how do you actually go about, I guess, recording all of that information, because it's all useful information and presumably it's too much for one person to kind of do. So I'm just curious about that process of staying close to each vine, understanding what each part of the vineyard might need, but then also how does that information stay? Where does that live?
First of all, you need not only myself, you need fantastic helping hands in the winery, which keeps you all the information, because it's true, I can't work the 24 hectares by myself. I have a right hand on the tractor, I have a right hand in the hand worker, I have a right hand in the office and one right hand in the cellar. These are the most important things for me because we communicate always together. And myself, I try to be at minimum 1 hour when I'm at home every day out in the vineyard. So you always walk through. And even if I do a walk with my children, so with my dog, we always go through the vineyards. So always you see it. But years by years, when you know the vineyards like you know your best friend, then you exactly know when it's drier, you just have to go to one vine to know exactly what happens. I have in every vineyard 2 or 3 different wines stocks, which shows me exactly if they're stressed or not, if they're healthy or not. So it's always a part of being very much outside, even if you not always can do the whole day working outside because you have to do so much in a good way. and that you have this right helping hands outside and you take your time to go out. So I'm, for example, not jogging. My wife is a doctor of medicine. She always goes for jogging, and I do understand her because she's inside. But when I come home at night, I want to be inside, not outside anymore, because I always anyway in the vineyards and walking. It's an opposite thing.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating, and it's, as you say, it's observation, and to use your own term there, it's being at home. It's being present. It sounds as though there is no shortcut for time spent, and as I say, I'm just picturing this idea of this relationship, this observation, and having ways of getting feedback from the vineyard and from the plants as to what they need, and then I guess going through that. Okay, do I want to give them that? Is that what I actually want to do? And again, it kind of opens up into, I guess, myriad decisions that you need to make, and that complexity, inside the brain of a winemaker. But that being said, I do want to ask you in closing, really, Georg, to take us, I guess, from there, from the Leiterberg, from your site, kind of a little bit out into the marketplace, and I guess ask you to look ahead. I know that you've got the Austrian tasting in London coming up on the 6th of February, and I'm just curious, what does that sort of mean now to you in terms of, I guess, your relationship with both your importer in the UK, the customers, and just what is it that's sort of front of mind as you look ahead to next week?
I'm very, very happy to be finally again in London, because it's always, when you taste the wines at home or when you taste the wines there, and when you can see the faces of the people who taste them, if you did a fantastic job, or if something that you can't feel at home but you feel there. It's for me one of the most important thing. And from the part of the need of wine that they have, it shows that they are quite good. It's because there's some wine, of course, needed in London. So that shows in a good phase. But most important for me is I have my Blaufränkisch, my Pinot Blancs with me. I have the single vineyards, my import, Clark Foster wines, the helping hands behind. So I'm so happy to see so much old customers and new customers up there to taste the wines together and to listen to them, what they think about.
Okay, so again, it's that relationship, that two-way process, and just in the last sort of 4 minutes or so, I just really to say, is there anything else that you wanted to say today that you didn't get the chance to say, or are you happy to leave it there, looking ahead to next week?
Maybe what I missed to say is that my free time activity is to eat and drink.
Yeah.
Something that I sometimes miss to say, because very often people ask me, to which food does the wines fit and everything? And they said to me very often, how would you compare it in the world of fine wines? And I said, always, our wines are hard to compare because they're all origins. But if you're in the world of fine wines, how to treat our wines or the wines from Burgenland is to treat them like you treat Burgundy and not Bordeaux. That means to chill it down a little bit, to serve it with lower temperature and let it warm up in the glasses. Decant it not too long. You miss the first steps of complexity that the wine show you and makes you more fascinating. And a great wine is always the same. The last sip was the best one.
I love it. And that's just to say that it's always getting better. It's developing.
Yeah. In the way of developing, as I find my trust in our vineyards by our own cellar. When I look back and I look to the wines and winemakers who made the wines, from my grandfather, my father, my mother together, my sister with me together, myself. And you always work on the same vineyards, but you feel the different decant, let me say, the different time that it was, or the interpretation that they had at this time. And when you open up the bottles, and all the bottles, that I opened up, if it's a good bottle, of course, and it's well aged and not overdone, then it shows that we're working with the right terroir. We just have to interpret it in the way that it shows to you.
A huge thanks to today's guest, Georg Preiler of Weingut Preiler. Be sure to visit preiler.at/en, where you can learn more about the winery and find their main social media handles. Please help to amplify this episode and the series by sharing the direct link, which is interpretingwine.com/495. You can find links to all episodes from the series in the description below. And of course, I'd love to have you following along with me on social media, where I'm at Interpreting Wine on Instagram and Facebook, and at Wine Podcast on Twitter. Next time on the Interpreting Wine Leiterberg series in episode 496, I'll be speaking with Robert Kramer of Weingut Esterhazy. Make sure you're subscribed to be alerted when the episode goes live. See you then.